Now that you've identified that you have the preliminary necessities for a modification, it's time to go to step 2. And step 2, in my opinion, is always to contact the lender. They do offer in most cases a website with a brief tutorial. Personally, I like to contact the lender to find out if I can get this done in any kind of fashion. And that would begin by, I ask several questions, and we'll start with, can my loan be modified? The investor of a loan is not necessarily the bank or servicer you make your payments to. However, the servicer will almost always know if your loan can be modified. So I'll call and ask. If I don't get the proper answer the first time, sometimes I'll ask twice or go to a second call to find out if that can be done, because you don't always get the best person on your first call. The next question I ask is the investor participating in the Making Homes Affordable program? I do this because the guidelines for the Making Home Affordable program are already written down. They're very specific. We know what they are. We can look them up, and we know what to do. If the home is not owner-occupied, we already know it cannot qualify for the Making Home Affordable program because as of today, it still does not allow for non-owner-occupied properties. If it's not, or what programs are available if it is not participating in the Making Home Affordable program. The first thing I'll ask, if they tell me it can be modified but is not participating in the Making Home Affordable program, I'll ask, do I need to be late? Some mortgages cannot be modified if you're not delinquent. Now, that's not to say that you should go delinquent. Personally, I think that's a very bad idea and it will be very bad for your credit. But it's important to know if you're going to be wasting your time. The next question I ask is, do you know what the floor interest rate is? The reason for that is I want to figure out if I can qualify myself for a modification, but I do need to know what the lowest rate would be to qualify for that modification. The next thing I ask is, what DTI, which is debt to income ratio, for each dollar I bring in, how much can go out in debt and still qualify for the modification? So I'll ask, what DTI, or debt to income ratio, do they use for modifications? The next thing I'll ask is, what is the turnaround time? I like to know roughly what I'm looking at. Now, I will be frank with you, the turnaround times that they give you are generally not very clear, and I take them with a grain of salt. But that being said, I like to have an idea of what I'm looking at. The next thing I'll ask the person, and hopefully you get somebody who's knowledgeable when you call, is I ask for a brief description of how they want the modification process to proceed. And most of them are more than happy to explain to you in depth how that bank does its modifications. Now that you pass the litmus test of the first part of qualifying for a modification, it's important to make the second step. My second step is always contacting the bank. I do this for a lot of reasons, and there are some helpful banks that have good websites, but I can't ask certain questions that I'm going to ask on this call. As you learn more about modifying your mortgage, you'll know why I ask these questions. The first question I ask is, can my loan be modified? If you call the banks, usually you'll get somebody knowledgeable, and they'll be more than happy to answer these questions for you. In some cases, your loan cannot be modified, and you'll be doing a lot of work for nothing. But if it can be modified, the next question I ask is the investor participating in the Making Homes Affordable program? That's the government's program. The guidelines are very concise, and I don't need to ask too many more questions if the answer is a yes. If the answer is a no, or if the home is non-owner occupied, I ask what programs are available. Generally, they're going to tell you, yes, the loan can be modified, and they can't tell you much more than that, but if you ask a few questions, you usually get an idea of what you can do. I'll ask, do I need to be late to qualify for a modification under this program? I'll ask, do you know what the floor rate is? I need to know this for qualification purposes, and they'll usually tell you. And I also ask, what debt to income, I put DTI here, what debt to income ratio do I need to qualify for this program. Normally it's 37% of your income should be your payment. The next question they ask is, what is the turnaround time? You won't often get a good answer on this, but at least it'll give you an idea of how long you're looking at. To be completely frank with you, 6 months is a fairly good estimate under normal circumstances. And the last thing I ask the person I'm speaking to is, could you briefly describe what I have to do to modify a mortgage with you? One thing I do not do is give them financial information at this point, although it'll sometimes be asked for. And if they do ask for it, I'm under the opinion that it's best to be prepared. And so what I would do is gather this information. If they ask for financial information, say, I don't have that now, and I'll call you back when I do. I like to prepare myself so I have all the information clean, neat, and prepared for when they ask this. Now it's time to gather your financial information. In other words, what do I need? If you're a salaried borrower, somebody who gets a paycheck every week, taxes are removed, etc., you're going to get pay stubs. You get them probably every week. Usually people throw them out, but it's time to hang on to them. You're going to need them all the way through this process. So you're going to need your 2 most recent pay stubs. Get them out right away. You're going to need your last year's tax return. Now it's 2010, so let's assume it's 2009 tax returns you're going to need. If you didn't file your 2009 tax returns and you filed an extension, you'll need a letter of extension and your 2008 tax returns. And your 2 most recent bank statements, and we'll address why they want that in a minute. And last but not least, you're going to need your mortgage statement, the statement that you get each month with your mortgage, and I'll address why you need that later also. What I've done here is it's now time to figure out what your monthly income is. And it's very simple if you get pay stubs, and it's really, there's not a lot of things you can do. It kind of is what it is. So what I have here is a sample pay stub, and I've had some mathematical calculations in there. But on every pay stub, you'll notice there's a period ending date. In the case of this one, it's 4/27/2010. On the website, you'll notice that there's a calendar, and there's a corresponding week number to let you know what week it is in the year. This particular period ending is week number 18. So that's an important number, and I'll write 18 off to the side. Then you're going to have your gross earnings, regular overtime and other, your gross earnings, and hours in some cases, it depends, but this is the sample one I'm using. And then you're going to have your net pay. In most cases, it'll show the net pay. If it doesn't, what I usually do is add the gross taxes year to date and other deductions and subtract them at a later time. So, if we've got we've got our gross pay per week of $463 and $139. But more importantly, they don't look at that. What they look at is the gross and net year to date, YTD on most pay stubs. In this particular borrower, you've got a gross year to date of $73.04. Then you've got overtime of $17.05, and you've got other of $8.18, giving us a total gross year to date of $98.27. We need to figure out how this is done on a monthly basis. When they ask you for your financials, they're going to ask for monthly, not weekly, not yearly, but monthly. Now, it's always easy to take your yearly W-2s and just divide by 12, and that's probably the easiest way, but you might be losing some income that you need or gaining some income that you probably shouldn't have. So the best way to do it is with the pay stub. So you would take your gross year to date. In this case, that's $98.27. Divide that number by the number of weeks now, which is 18. That's going to equal your average weekly earnings for this year-to-date period. In this case, that's $545.94. Now, we need to convert that to a monthly, and how do we do that? Well, we take $545.94 and multiply that number by 52, because there's 52 weeks in a year, which would give us $28,389. Now we have our gross for the year, but we need to figure out how much that is per month. We'll divide $28,389 by 12, which equals a gross monthly earnings of $23.65. Now you need to get the net, because they often do ask it for net. In this case, this guy's net pay is $68.88. We follow the same formula. We divide by the number of weeks in the pay period. That's 18. That gives us $382.67 average pay for this particular person's year to date. Now to get a year's worth, we have to go times 52 weeks, which gives us $19,898. Now to get that on an average monthly basis, we'll go divide by 12, which will give us $1,658. That's our gross, and that's our net. Okay, once we've done that, we are at least ready to get started.